Hello everyone, welcome back to my channel. FPL Vincenzo here, and wanted to spend a little bit of time today talking about the bench boost. I'm focused on this chip more than the other ones in the game right now because I think it's the one most managers are considering using at the start of the season. Plenty of debate around what's better between game week 1 and game week 2, so we'll look at both of those opportunities and discuss sort of where I am in my thoughts around when to bench boost. Obviously, there is the option as well to bench boost later in the season, and I will touch on that a little bit as well. But primarily, this pod is around game week 1 versus game week 2, and we'll share some thoughts on both. So I'll just jump straight into it and start looking at what we're seeing at the differences between game week 1 and game week 2. I think, first of all, I look at the fixtures in the first 2 weeks, and there's plenty of teams where I don't think there's loads of difference. So Sunderland, to start with, game week 1, Ipswich away, game week 2, Fulham at home. I think if you're going to pick Sunderland players, it doesn't really matter around the bench boost because the difficulty of the fixtures is kind of similar in game week 1 versus game week 2. I think the same mainly for Manchester United, Hull away, and then Ipswich at home. I think the same is true of Chelsea. Fulham away in game week 1 is maybe a better fixture right now than many think. And then they've got Brighton at home in game week 2. And those three, I think, you can kind of play the bench boost in either. And if you're going to load up with multiple players from any of those three teams, I think you want to play them either in game week 1 or game week 2. So it's not really restricted. There'll be a few other teams where you can maybe make that argument as well. Liverpool, say on paper, Newcastle away in game week 1 is much harder than Nottingham Forest at home in game week 2. But to me, particularly for attacking players from Liverpool, I think they're very close. Newcastle, obviously under new management, few new players coming. I think that's possibly to start the season an easier fixture than many think. I don't think Newcastle will start the season that well. And I think they are, I use the word exploitable in the early game weeks. I really like that fixture for an attacking team playing against Newcastle in the early game weeks. So I wouldn't hesitate at all to have Liverpool players in that game, despite St James's Park traditionally being harder. So Sunderland, Man United, Liverpool, Chelsea. If your game week 1 draft is based around those 4 teams primarily, I don't think it really matters between game week 1 and game week 2. Clearly, the team it does matter for are Coventry and Hull. Game week 2, they're much better. They play each other. That's obviously a lot better than the game week 1 fixtures where Coventry have Arsenal away, Hull have Manchester United at home. So if you want to fill your squad with Coventry and Hull players, game week 2 clearly stands out. But I'm not really focused on picking players from weak teams. One of my general FPL rules that has existed for numerous years now is pick good players from good teams. And I look at those good teams. Arsenal, clearly much better fixture in game week 1, Coventry at home versus Aston Villa away. Now you could bench boost Aston Villa away, but I wouldn't have the highest expectations for Arsenal assets in that game. Man City, a bit the same. I think Bournemouth at home is much superior to Crystal Palace away in game week 2. So if you're looking to add to your Man United, Sunderland, Chelsea and Liverpool players with Arsenal and Man City, there's clearly a bigger advantage to go in game week 1 for the bench boost because, say, it's not the worst to bench boost Crystal Palace away and Aston Villa away, but that's clearly not optimal. On the flip side of Arsenal and Man City, the teams where probably the bigger teams where game week 2 is superior is Bournemouth. Man City away in 1, you're not going to want to bench boost that, but Everton at home in 2 is really good. So if you really want a Truffaut or someone like that, you can bench them in 1 and obviously play them on the bench boost in 2. I agree on Tottenham as well. I've just spoken about my expectations for Newcastle. Tottenham are at home to Newcastle game week 2. Game week 1 away to Brentford, maybe not great. So if you're looking at Tottenham midfielders, maybe a Pedro Porro or something, you might think, okay, game week 2 is much better. So there's my big difference. My preference right now is to have more Arsenal and Man City players rather than more Tottenham and Bournemouth players. Therefore, to try and maximise the bench boost more, I want more good players from good teams. For me, that makes game week 1 an advantage. So if by committing to game week 1, I can primarily pick a team that's focused on Arsenal players, Man City players, Sunderland, Man United, Chelsea, Liverpool. There's my 6 sort of base teams. with a sprinkling of a few other players that maybe suit game week 1. Teams like Brentford, teams like Brighton, maybe a little bit of Nottingham Forest, things like that. Their fixtures in game week 1, those sort of teams are not bad either. So if I bench boosted with that base, that's really good. And that stands out more to me than bench boosted in game week 2, where I get the players maybe a bit cheaper from Coventry versus teams like Brentford and teams like Brighton. But I just don't want to be held with like Coventry and Hull players until I play my wild card. And once you're picking 4 million assets from those cheaper teams, they're really hard to sell those players. I don't want to be using transfers on those players either. So for that reason, I'm sort of prioritizing game week 1 over game week 2. I then look at the betting odds for the 2 weeks. And what you can see on the screen right now is the odds for the home win, the draw, and the away win in each of the fixtures for game week 1 versus and game week 2. In game week 1, 3 big standouts. So Arsenal at home to Coventry, Arsenal are 85% likely to win that game, according to bookmaker odds. That's the biggest win percentage across the first 2 game weeks. More reason to maybe want an Arsenal triple up. Again, that's easier to do with a bench boost game week 1 than a bench boost game week 2. Arsenal, for example, only 52% likely to win against Aston Villa. You've also in game week 1 got 2 teams at 68%. Man City at home to Bournemouth, Man United against Hull. So between Arsenal, Man United and Man City, all 3 over 68% or higher to win their fixture. Whereas in game week 2, the win probabilities maybe not quite as good. You've got Liverpool, 75% likely to beat Nottingham Forest, supposedly. I think that's a bit higher personally, but this is where individual interpretation is different to the bookmakers. Man United, 77% to beat Ipswich, and then Man City, 65% to beat Crystal Palace. Maybe that's, again, a little bit high. You've also got Arsenal above 50% as well to beat Aston Villa. But to me, the focus is on, I think, Arsenal in game week 1. That's the money fixture, should we say, in the first 2 game weeks. That's the one where the result looks the most guaranteed, the outcome looks the most guaranteed. Why would we not want to maximise that? If you're going to bench boost in game week 2, there's a very good chance you probably won't start with triple Arsenal. And maybe you're missing opportunity in game week 1 just because you want to bench boost with more Coventry players or something along those sort of lines. So, yeah, I think that's a strong starting point for game week 1, is the 3 higher win probabilities. Also, what's noteworthy in both game weeks, but I think particularly in game week 1, is the closeness of a lot of the fixtures. So if you are picking players where you're not so sure, so Brighton against Aston Villa looks quite close, Brentford, Tottenham, Nottingham Forest, Leeds, particularly Ipswich, Sunderland, you should happily play those sort of players. If you want to go for an Ipswich defender at 4 million, that's not bad. Sunderland have got Ian Hume playing, who's maybe going to play on the wing, maybe not, but you can punt that at 38%. Defender playing in midfield. I'd say if you want Brighton, fairly good win probability at home to Aston Villa. They've got some cheap players. Same for Brentford. If you want to risk a couple of their players, a Kaude or someone like that at 4.5, not bad either. I think game week 2, the win probabilities of the home team maybe not quite as good. You've got a little bit around Tottenham, a little bit around Leeds, but harder with the home teams. Aston Villa, maybe Crystal Palace and things like that, a bit lower. So to me, this favours game week 1 as well. Because even if you look at game week 2 and you think, I've got Coventry, it's only 47%. That's the same as Everton to beat Crystal Palace in game week 1. Doesn't really do it for me. It's not like we're getting a load of budget players at a 60% win probability or a 70%. It's a lot lower than that. So yeah, moving on from there. So some rough talking points here, and this is where I'll sort of share most of my thoughts. In game week 1, as I've mentioned before, better fixtures for Arsenal and Man City, and Arsenal versus Coventry is the strongest fixture across the opening 2 game weeks. So ideally, we're looking at least double ups from both of those 2 teams. I think probably a treble up is plausible from one or both of those 2 teams as well. Particularly if we was prepared to go without someone like Bruno Fernandes and free money, could we end up with Gabriel and 2 other Arsenal players? Could we end up with Haaland, Semenyo, and a Man City defender? I think it's possible. And I quite like the thought of the best 2 teams in the league owning 6 players from them and maximising that. Also think in game week 1, it's the only opportunity of the whole season to play 2 chips at once. We're effectively on wild card here going into game week 1. So you could view it from the stance that this is a wild card and a bench boost at the same time. Obviously, the game prevents you from using 2 chips at once. So you're in a bit of a rare situation here. And that's quite appealing. Personally, I think the player minutes are more trustworthy in game week 1. Obviously, you're picking a team 24 hours. If you're picking from Arsenal and Coventry, the deadline's like 2 hours before kickoff. If it's the day after, is 24 hours before kickoff. I think you'll know more information than trying to pick a team a week in advance. What are you going to do if you plan to wildcard in bench boost 2, and one of the players you've started with in game week 1 isn't available in game week 2? Maybe they get sent off. Maybe you get rumour that they've picked up a niggle in training. Are you going to make a transfer in game week 2 to still get the full quota of bench boost players, or are you going to accept that you're going to play with a non-playing player on your bench? I don't want to put myself at that risk in that position to have to pick a team 7-8 days before the bench boost when I can do one 2 hours, 24 hours before this player participates. And again, some of these World Cup players have come back late. I think we saw this week with Man City that Mark Gahey, Elliot Anderson, players like that only came back to training this week, and obviously Erling Haaland as well. Just don't pick them, I think, is the logical thing. I think Haaland is a different beast in that sense that he's not really required to have like peak fitness. He stands up front in the middle of the pitch, walking around, explodes into life in odd moments. It's not like he's playing in a really intense central midfield role where it'll be noticed if he's flagging on the bleep test or something like that. I think it's different for fullbacks who are expected to get up and down, central midfielders who are expected to cover every blade of grass. To me, I'm not going to risk those players. I'm really confident here that I can get 15 players out in game week 1. And for this first bench boost, when there's no double game week, or as we know right now, no double game week, obviously something could happen and one could be put in later, which is maybe one benefit to waiting, that if 1 or 2 fixtures get cancelled for some unexpected reason, you've got a bench boost to maximise. Equally, you've got a triple captain to maximise if you hold on to that one instead. But to me right now, I'd be quite confident that I could pick 15 players that will play in game week 1. Let's pick a team in my head. I don't even know if this team is possible within the full budget. But let's look at Donnarumma in goal. I think Semenyo and Haaland will play. So there's a triple up from Man City. I'd be confident with the minutes. Arsenal, you want 3. Gabriel, Calafiori. I think will definitely play. And then maybe you can settle on a midfielder that will play. Will Bruno G. I think Kai Havertz will probably play if you want him, whether that's as a 10, whether that's as a 9, maybe even as an 8. But I'd be quite confident Gabriel, Calafiori and Havertz would play. With likes of João Pedro, he's going to play. Calvert-Lewin, he's going to play. If you really wanted to and didn't want to risk Haaland, you could easily go with Pedro, Calvert-Lewin, Havertz up front. I think all 3 of those are safe. Igor Thiago, I think, is safe as an option for game week 1 as well. Then in midfield, you've got Semenyo, you've got Wirtz and Szoboszlai at Liverpool, you've got Bruno Fernandes and Buemo, these sorts of guys at Man United that you can pick. Brighton, I think you're safe with the minutes of someone like Gross. And then, I say defenders, there's plenty of these DEFCON guys. The new Leeds defender, I think, will definitely play. James Tarkowski will play. Calafiori will play. Coyote will play. In goal, you've got Verbruggen, Kinski, Donnarumma, these sort of guys. I don't think there's much risk with that 15 that they're all going to play in game week 1. And I think that's ultimately what you're looking for that first bench boost, that get your sort of bank at 8 points for 4 players appearing. Hopefully, if you've got reasonably steady players, you can get 10 to 12 points. I think we have to lower our expectations. I think in normal FPL sort of mindset, you're looking at a 16 points bench boost, maybe even a 20-point bench boost. I think you lower those expectations. And I think you accept it with this first one, that you get 10 or 12 points. You get 4 players all on the pitch. Maybe one of them gets a clean sheet, one of them gets DEFCON, one of them gets an attacking return or something. And that 8 points becomes 10 or 12, and you move on. And I'd be more than happy with that. The trustworthy minutes in game week 1 help with that. Also, I've already said the fixtures are quite balanced for most teams. I say Coventry have got a hard game with Arsenal. Bournemouth maybe got it tough against Man City. There'll be a couple of other teams in game week 1 where you'd probably look at it and think, I won't really want to bench boost with them. But in general, I think you'll have quite a deep squad. That one I just laid out, I think, is quite a deep squad. And 15 fairly good assets that you'd probably be quite content to play most weeks. That gives you the opportunity, if you want, to delay the wild card and not be forced to play it sort of so soon after the bench boost, if you want. There still might be benefits to playing it earlier. And at the moment, I'm quite keen to bench boost 1 and to wildcard in 6. Maybe it's a discussion for another pod before the season starts, my reason behind that. But if it gets to game week 6 and my team's doing quite well and I've rolled some transfers, etc., then I'm open-minded to delay the wildcard. I do think if you bench boost in game week 2, that becomes harder. So if I look at game week 2 here, I say the main benefit really to playing the wildcard then is Coventry, allowing the budget saving, a couple of 4 million defenders available, maybe some attacking players as well who are a bit cheaper. But the Coventry fixtures in game week 1 and game week 3 are not very good. So effectively, if you're going to triple up on Coventry to try and maximise that whole game in 2 and keep a low budget on your bench, that is a justifiable way to play the game, you're effectively saying that all of your other 11 outfield players need to play game week 1 and game week 3 because you're not going to want to play your Coventry players in either of those 2 weeks. So do you want to put that pressure on your other 11 players to be available in game week 1 and game week 3? And can you find enough good players who are really good in game week 1 and game week 3? For example, Chelsea are obviously away to Arsenal in game week 3. How would you feel in game week 3 with like double Chelsea and triple Coventry? You're not going to bench all 5. You're not going to want to bench all 5 of those. And you're probably playing suboptimally if you're forcing yourself to play loads of Chelsea players at the Emirates, things like that. So I don't think you have the same issues if you bench boost in game week 1, because you have a deeper squad without Coventry players. There's more players that can play each week. You're not relying on 11. And I think that's true as well for most teams with good game week 2 fixtures. They've all got difficulties in 1 and 3. So if I go back to here and you look at game week 2, say Chelsea have it tough in game week 3 away to Arsenal. Coventry have it tough in game week 3 away to Manchester City. Sunderland, if you've started with them, it's not a great fixture away to Brentford. So if you've got a Brobby up front or you've got a Dan Ballard or something, do you really want to play them in that fixture in game week 3? I think you're hesitant. If you loaded up on Man United, it's not the worst again away to Everton, but it's not incredible either. Bournemouth, if you want to go with that bench boost and pick them at home to Everton, they've got Newcastle away in 3. Again, I said Newcastle won't start well, but it's not a great fixture for Truffert. He could do okay, and maybe it's not the worst to play him because of his higher positioning, but not great. Tottenham away to Forest, is that incredible in game week 3? I don't know. So you just look at the better teams in game week 2, and most of them are iffy in game week 3 in particular. You could end up with a very weak game week 3 looking squad if you've gone heavy on Man United, Sunderland, Chelsea from the start, whereas maybe in game week 1, you do want a sprinkling of those teams, but maybe you're not so forced to pick from there because you want more Arsenal, who have got a home game in game week 3, more Man City, who have got a home game in game week 3, for example. So, yeah, I think game week 2, you pigeonhole yourself a little bit. The game week 3 looks rough. You could wildcard in game week 3 and obviously solve that problem, but that's forcing yourself into that early wildcard. You could wildcard in game week 4 instead. I think it's really hard to bench boost 2 and play through. Not impossible. I'm sure people will have drafts where it's doable, but harder. I think the bench boost 1 gives more fluidity and more opportunity to delay the wild card should you want to. And as I say, game week 2, I think, is also harder around working out the World Cup players. Will they be back? Just in general, I think identifying starting 11s the day before the season starts is harder 7-8 days in advance rather than 1 day in advance. So, yeah, for quite a few reasons, I don't like this bench boost game week 2. And I think really it's the appeal of Coventry and a couple of 4 million defenders that's dictating the wild card. One thing I will touch on quickly on the bench boost game week 1 and why I quite like it, because I think right now I'm undecided in quite a lot. Usually, I think at this point in the season, I've got clarity on quite a few things in FPL in terms of the direction my team is heading, sort of a loose structure. and it's just sort of tweaking around the edges before, obviously, the original deadline. I'm going to do a pod before the season starts around my evolving drafts. And I've made 5 or 6 quite different drafts, actually, between game launch and where we are now. And they've evolved for different reasons. But one thing I kind of have considered now is that I think I'm more willing to pick upside players, which is quite different for me and very rogue compared to my normal strategy. And I just look at this game week 1 and I say Brentford, I'd happily bench boost home to Tottenham. And they've got 3 home games in 5. Brighton, they've got some European games, but if you picked a couple of them, 3 home games again, Coventry away in 4 is really nice. Everton, not against picking a Tarkowski or a Dewsbury Hall or a Garner or someone like that. 3 home games in 5, the 2 away games are passable if you need it. Leeds, really nice 5 fixtures in general. Game week 3 is not so great, but because most other teams are fairly good in 3, you can bench them if you wanted to. But again, if you had a defender or you had Calvert-Lewin, I think you could play them away to Brighton and be okay with it. So I think the sort of squad players tick quite a lot of boxes. The upside players you can pick for numerous weeks. And I actually think the hardest part of committing to this plan is finding 3 players to bench each week. And I'm looking at someone like Hull right now. So there's a couple of players at Hull who are quite cheap, obviously. But Hull are getting busy in the transfer market. Sort of double figures they could reach in new signings before the end of the transfer window. Some of those players may make it before game week 1. Certainly more of them will make it before game week 2. I don't know sort of in terms of what level of fitness or conditioning these players will arrive in. But I imagine most of these new signings will be in the whole starting 11 fairly quickly. If there's a hope that players from last year are in the whole starting lineup, and I'm looking at someone like Slater in midfield, who's a 4.5 million mid, I'm quite confident right now if he's going to start a game in this first 5 block, he's going to be game week 1. So if I'm thinking of getting more budget on the bench, would I rather have a Coventry defender for 5 weeks who I can only play once, or would I rather have a whole mid for 4.5 that I'm only going to play once? I think there's more options in defence than midfield right now. There's the DEFCON guys. There's plenty of defenders who are playing quite high for their teams, really high position, bigger threat for goals and assists. I'm happy to lock up my attacker spot on a 4.5 million mid to start the season. And if he gets 2 points later at Hull against Man United, I'll take it. I'll go into that game hoping he sneaks a DEFCON. I think there's some possibility he might take the odd corner. Who knows? And maybe I'll be lucky and get more than 2 points if he gets DEFCON or a fluky assist or unexpected assist, whatever. But these players like that, and say people might go in with Coventry defenders and think they're going to start this Van Ewing at right back, Thomas at centre back. Coventry may buy some new players before the season starts. And you assume that the new players are likely to replace last year's promoted players because you would expect Coventry are going to be buying a higher standard of player than they used to have, rather than other teams who might bolster their squad out with their transfers rather than looking to directly improve the 11. I do think with a promoted team, they're more likely to improve the 11 with their signings rather than just buy at the same level they already have. So for Hull and Coventry, can you guarantee the minutes for game week 2? Could they buy someone between the game week 1 and game week 2 deadline and then throw them straight in? I'm not saying they will, but I think it's a possibility. Whereas I say some of these cheap players, the Coventry, the Hull, I'm more trusting they'll start game week 1 than what I am they'll start game week 2. So if I'm looking for budget players, because we obviously still want our collection of premiums, you've got a couple that Slater, 4.5 million whole mid. I think Brighton right now, Diego Gomez looks fairly good for minutes, at least in game week 1 on the right. Matoma's out, Minte may be out. He's a facilitating player at 5 million, been known to get DEFCON here and there as well. I still think in game week 1, you can go in with a bench of something like Kinski away to Brentford. There'll be 4.5 million defenders, say this Hume at Sunderland. Will he still be playing on the right of midfield like we've seen in pre-season? If he is, and he only lasts 1 game week there, it's going to be Ipswich away. I would imagine he plays on the right of midfield before he maybe gets brought back into defence. I know they've got a few problems, Sunderland, with Mukiele and El Dorate and people, so maybe he'll still play in defence anyway. But we've seen enough of him in pre-season that he's at least starting right now on the wing. I don't think that's a long-term, in my opinion, I don't think that's a long-term thing, but you might get away with it for 1 or 2 weeks at the start. So is it the end of the world if you went in with Kinski at 4.5 on the bench because you've got 4.5 million keepers? Then you've got a Sunderland defender who might be playing on the wing for 4.5, and then you've got a Brighton mid playing on the wing who might get DEFCON for 5, and then a whole midfielder for 4.5. That's not a big spend in midfield, but that's quite a bit more appealing to me than the game week 2 bench boost with Coventry players. And I'm looking at who else I might have who's quite cheap that I could rely on. And maybe the options for me aren't so good there. So I think that's my loose plan, to play it early, the bench boost. And the reasons for the general use of the early bench boost is that because there's so much unknown right now, we don't know who the good DEFCON picks are. We've got some data from last season, but that's not guaranteed to repeat. Some team, or plenty of teams, are under new management. We need to see what formations they play, how the team's set up, and that can have an impact on DEFCON and things. So there's a lot of unknown at the start, too many new managers, and we don't know which players are going to flourish under those new managers, and flourish in terms of DEFCON, flourish in terms of attacking contributions. So before we fall into a template where those things are known, and I think by sort of game week 6, game week 8, we'll know which defenders are getting DEFCON. We know this year's Senesi will be. We'll know which midfielders are getting DEFCON. We'll know who's going to be this year's Elliot Anderson / James Garner. So by playing the bench boost early, I can spread my money because I don't know who the good players are. I can maybe, because it's so short term, I can pick upside picks. I can pick 2 playing goalkeepers. I can pick 3 playing strikers and things like that, knowing that longer term, I don't want to do that. I don't want to spend 4.5 on my backup keeper. I only want the budget striker personally, because I don't think strikers are value for money in this game. So if I'm going to have my third bench spot every week, I'd rather that be a striker. Historically, the third bench spot has been a 4 million defender. For me, in my plan and expectation at the moment, my third bench spot is budget striker. Obviously, that's no good towards a bench boost because we want our bench players to have minutes. There's a good chance my third striker, by the time I wildcard, will be a version of Mark Gooey last year, who's getting no minutes. But it doesn't matter. I don't need him. I shouldn't be 3 deep on the bench at any point. I don't have a bench boost still to use. So I want to get this bench boost gone and play quite a short format game at the start, where it gives me a chance to punt upside picks. It gives me a chance to have a bad structure, i.e. 3 playing strikers, 2 playing goalkeepers, things like that. And all of those things that are technically wrong in terms of a strategy, I can then correct on a wild card. So for me at the moment, I'm loosely sort of tied, committed to game week 6. But if I go earlier than that, I'm good with it. 3 or 4. Equally, if I stretch it a bit to 8, I'm good. But I don't really see myself holding out on that wild card till like game week 15, 16. And getting the bench boost gone before the wild card makes a lot of sense to me, because the wild card, being the most powerful chip, allows me to get onto the right structure. I think it's going to be harder to be on the right structure and then facilitate 15 players. Whereas I can be on the wrong structure to start with, get the bench boost gone, wild card into the right structure. That's one less hassle on my mind when it comes to that bench boost. So keen to play it early for that reason. So yeah, that's where I am. Bench boost 1 for me currently. Before the deadline, I will share, I'll do another pod around my evolving drafts. I've made 5 or 6, so I'll talk through each phase of that. And obviously you'll get a taste then of where my head currently is in terms of my current team. Not that it will definitely stick to that, but you'll get an idea. And then, yeah, we'll answer some more questions then. So if you like this content, please like the pod. Please subscribe to my channel. And so we'll have a couple more pods out between now and the launch for game week 1. So thanks for listening, and I'll speak to you all soon.